Well, welcome to the Q&A session by the Illinois Learn to Hunt program. My name is Dan Stevens.
And I'm Jason Buckley.
And we're joined today by Luke Garver. Luke is the Wild Turkey Program Manager for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So thanks for joining us, Luke. And if you'll give kind of a quick, maybe, 2 or 3 minute description of kind of what the program is and kind of a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm Luke Garver, like you mentioned, the Wild Turkey Project Manager, and my position, as you would imagine, is kind of handling all things wild turkey for the Department of Natural Resources. Number one, helping to manage the hunting seasons, setting dates, setting quotas, compiling harvest data, looking at that data, and kind of looking over how population trends are heading up and down. And then we also take a look at reproductive data and just how population trends are faring across the state. And then I also help coordinate a lot of habitat work, either through grant funding, through NGOs, or through federal funding on public land. So yeah, that's about the ins and outs of the Turkey Project.
Excellent. Sounds like you've kind of got your hands full there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. With the spring season just wrapping up yesterday, in fact, could you give us a quick update on how the season went and kind of how the future looks?
Yeah, sure. So, as everybody's well aware, it's been an odd spring, and that the COVID-19 pandemic and the stay-at-home order here in Illinois and across the country really played into the spring turkey season. So it's been an interesting year to see how that affects the harvest trends. Most of the southeastern states, they opened their turkey seasons before us. And so it was really eye-opening to watch their seasons unfold. Many of those states did not close down any public land. So we saw harvest right off the bat spike really high, especially on public lands. And there were some reports I read where I think Georgia and Tennessee in particular had exceeded last year's harvest totals halfway through their season. And
wow.
They're well on their way to record harvest. And
sure.
And they're looking at very increased hunter success, and that's due to increased hunter effort, and that was particularly seen on public land. And so on one hand, it was an outstanding year for people enjoying time in the woods and for R3 and money raised towards permits and licenses. However, it'll be interesting to see if this plays a role into how the turkey populations fare in some of those states in future years. Were too many toms potentially taken before they had an opportunity to breed would be the big concern there. As far as the Midwestern states, most of them start quite a bit later, at least a few weeks later than those southeastern states. And a lot of them had harvests that started off really high. I haven't seen the season summaries for many of the Midwestern states yet, but it looks like they weren't quite as high as some of those southeastern states that have very long seasons, very high bag limits. And so some of the more conservative Midwestern states have season structures and bag limits in place to limit that harvest pressure. And so and in Illinois, we're right along there. We have the season structure that's broken up into segments. We have quotas for each county and for many of our public land sites. So it kind of tempers that real big rush of harvest pressure, and that's what we predicted would happen, and that's kind of what played out. That being said, we started off the season with a really successful youth hunting season. And so the youth season coincided right at the beginning of this stay-at-home order. And
right.
Kids weren't playing baseball or soccer, and it looked like a lot of kids were able to get out and enjoy the turkey woods. And as a result, we posted a record harvest for the youth season. So it was
excellent.
Pretty neat to see. And then immediately following the youth season, the South Zone kicks in. and they got off to a great start, and the South Zone ended up posting a harvest that was the highest we've seen, I think, since 2012. And then North Zone starts a week after the South Zone, and that concluded yesterday, May 14th. And North Zone came in just right about the 5-year average. So still a good season. And when you think that there was no contribution whatsoever from state-owned public land,
Right.
ended up with a very strong harvest. All told, I think we had the highest total harvest that we've seen in several years, and certainly beat the last 2 years pretty easily. So yeah, it was all told, unfortunately, the public land hunters were not able to enjoy Illinois public lands or the state-owned public lands this year, but those that were able to get out on other public lands that aren't state-owned, that were still open, and on private land, it looks like they enjoyed a pretty successful season.
Excellent. Our next question is by Aaron, and Aaron asks, what is planned for the spring turkey permits that went unused for this year? Yeah,
so obviously that is a very hot button issue this year, and it's no surprise. It was unfortunate that the stay-at-home order coincided right before turkey season, and IDNR, in collaboration with the Department of Public Health and the governor's office, made the decision that it was in the public's best interest to close down all public lands for all activities right off the bat. Now, as a result, no turkey hunting was allowed on any state-owned public land. And at the time of that decision, our administrative rules, which govern turkey hunting, did not allow for refunds to be made. And so that's got a lot of people very concerned, but happy to report that IDNR has initiated the process right now to change administrative rules regarding refunds for spring turkey hunting permits. And the proposed rule, if it's passed by JCAR, which is the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, I think Jared covered that in the last Q&A.
Yep.
They are the committee that reviews the administrative rules, and so if it passes through their review, it would authorize the department to issue refunds to permit holders who were unable to access public lands. And so if passed, these rules would also provide for a process for all spring turkey hunters to go through a list of listed circumstances and work through the department to issue refunds. Overall, it's important to note that this process is being conducted in accordance with Illinois law and with our legal division, and all proposed changes need to be reviewed by the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. However, as of actually today, May 15th, that rule is up for public comment, and people can take a look at it, and I think it'll be up until at least mid-June. I'm not exactly certain, but the date is on. We have a link to that. I don't know if we can post that in the comments or
Yep, we certainly can
at the end here, and folks can get on there and review that administrative rule. And then with regard to hunting for the rest of 2020, that remains up in the air. The governor's office continues to work with IDNR and the Department of Public Health, and this is a revolving issue as we've been seeing all year. And fingers crossed, public lands will be open to hunting, sooner than later. But as far as when, I can't tell you. I wish I could. But fingers are crossed that we'll be able to get out there and enjoy the squirrel opener on August 1st. But time will tell, and if people just keep an eye on our website and on the Facebook page, they'll be able to keep up with all the latest news.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that update. And we definitely will put that link in the video description. So check down below and you'll be able to find that. Jason has our next question for us.
Sure. Tim asked, with the reduction in turkey harvest due to the stay-at-home orders effectively canceling the season on public land, what effect do you think this will have on the turkey population?
Well, overall, as I mentioned, we didn't have a reduced harvest. Public land hunters, we live in a state that's 97% private, so the vast majority of the harvest takes place on private land.
Mm-hmm.
But with regards to the public land shutdown, it definitely didn't hurt turkeys at all. I think we can rest assured there, unless there was some habitat work that was scheduled to occur that wasn't able to. But beyond that, as far as harvest and pressure on hens and nesting, I think the public land sites, the state-owned sites, would effectively act as refuges. And so with any luck, breeding was able to proceed unimpeded. The hens were able to find the dominant males that they wish on those public sites without any risk of harvest. And hopefully we see a little boon in recruitment in and around those public sites. So it's important to consider the size of a lot of IDNR sites. It's probably rare that a turkey or a flock of turkeys only uses public land, a particular site, for their entire home range.
Sure.
But it definitely would act as a refuge. And if there's pressure occurring from those private lands around it, they may have been spending a lot more time on those public lands than they typically would be. So yeah, I think overall, as far as the turkeys are concerned, they were happy to have a refuge, so to speak, where they weren't at risk of harvest.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And our next follow-up question, it kind of follows along the same trend. Charles asks, with a reduced harvest, do you anticipate more turkey permits being issued next year?
Yeah, so kind of what I alluded to was that we didn't see a reduction in harvest statewide, and in fact we kind of saw an uptick in harvest probably due to increased effort mostly. Public sites, the quotas for them are set a little different than county sites, and so they're more based on hunter density and providing a quality hunt than they are on turkey population, although that does weigh into it a little bit. So short answer, I don't expect to see an uptick in turkey permits just based on this year's harvest, although if we do see a substantial uptick in recruitment, there would be reason to increase the quotas for some counties or some sites even.
Sure. Now, just to clarify, when you use the term recruitment, you're referring to essentially the nest success of the bird and how likely it is to raise a brood. Correct.
Nest and brood success. Yeah. So recruitment is essentially, can we turn an egg into an adult turkey?
Sure.
That's one that's been recruited into the population.
Excellent.
Great. Kind of same vein. Kaitlyn asks, for our next question is, how does the IDNR decide how many turkey tags are available per county and also per site-specific tag numbers as well?
So I touched on the site-specific quotas there, but I'll go a little more in depth. So we have, for state-owned public land, we have a couple different categories, I guess you could say. We have just our sites that are open to hunters who have a permit for that county that the site is in. And so there's essentially no limit to the number of people who could get to that site. And those are typically the smaller sites or the sites that aren't as popular for turkey hunting. The real premier turkey hunting state-owned sites in Illinois are considered special hunt areas, and they have their own particular quota. And those quotas they're pretty much designed to reduce hunter density, and that plays into safety. We want everybody to be able to get out and enjoy a safe hunt without being worried about bumping into other turkey hunters, and then to provide a high quality hunt. And so those permits are allocated via lottery, and the quotas are set mostly in mind to keep in mind hunter density, and so the turkey population isn't weighed into as big of a factor as in terms of how many permits are issued for those sites. Now the county quotas, I play a much larger role in those, and I take into a lot of population data. So harvest data is the trends in harvest data for that county are particularly useful, and going even further, looking at success rates. You can't just look at harvest as its own metric, but how successful hunters are being. And if you're seeing hunters being more and more successful, it's an indicator that the population is steady or even rising. Another big one I look at is the brood survey. So every summer we send out statewide postcards for people to provide us with the observations of all hens and the young, the poults. And we devise a poult to hen ratio, and it gives us kind of an index on reproductive success, and that plays into it quite a bit too. And I'm sure a lot of people don't actually realize that when you report a harvested deer, one of the questions is how many turkeys did you see while deer hunting? And I use that data quite a bit too. It's a really robust long-term data set, and it's not necessarily the number of turkeys you see, but I particularly use the percentage of hunters who are seeing turkeys, and how that changes from year to year and from county to county. That can weigh into quotas. And then another big one is the hunter density. And so I look at the number of hunters per acre of habitat and try to let that factor into the quotas as well, to again provide a safe and high quality hunt for everyone.
Excellent, great. We'll move on to the next question. This question is a little bit more personal. This comes from Denny, and Denny asks, how does it feel to follow in your father's footsteps as the state's wild turkey biologist?
Yeah, so this one's I have a sneaky suspicion this came from a coworker, and it's a joke, but I'll still go into it because it's a good backstory. So, long story short, I am not the son of the state's previous wild turkey biologist. He's referring to Jerry Garver. So Jerry Garver was our state's very first wild turkey biologist, and I'm not sure the day or the year he started in that position, but Jerry was involved with the restoration of wild turkeys from the very beginning. So I know he was involved with turkeys from the late 60s and early 70s, but as far as when he actually became the wild turkey biologist, I'm not sure. But from the very start, Jerry was right in there in the thick of things with restoring turkeys to Illinois, and started in a handful of southern Illinois counties, and it, with the success that they saw down there, they just kept trapping and transplanting birds throughout the state, and it got to where we now have robust populations throughout the entire state. And Jerry Garver was right there in the middle of it. He worked out of Giant City State Park. And so while I'm not related to Jerry, we do share the same last name, and I consider him, one of those guys I stand on the shoulders of, and have big shoes to fill to keep up, trying to do a good job and make sure there's a lot of turkeys here in Illinois. And the Garver involvement with turkeys doesn't stop with Jerry either. Jerry's actual son, Jim Garver, actually works for the National Wild Turkey Federation. And if you are in southern Illinois, get a hold of Jim if you're interested in getting involved with the NWTF, because he's a regional director for chapters for basically a lot of the southern half of the state, and a little bit into Missouri as well. So yeah, I'm not related to that family, but they are good people, and I know them well. And a lot of history with Garvers and turkeys, I guess.
Sure.
It's mostly coincidence.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one thing a lot of people don't realize, especially, you know, if they're getting into hunting kind of now, is that in Illinois, there was a time where we didn't have a turkey population.
Absolutely,
it took
yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
conservation effort and a lot of resources to establish that population to where it is today.
Yeah, it's a little bit cliche, but I like, you know, wild turkeys are one of the greatest conservation stories in this country. You know, they're a very American or North American bird, and they were, you know, almost gone, and they virtually were gone in Illinois, and it's really cool to see how much they've bounced back. So, you know,
yeah, and recently, really,
yeah,
you know, 50 years or so.
Right, 1970 was the first modern hunting season, and
that was at the
just in a couple
Shawnee, right?
counties. What's that?
That was in the Shawnee National Forest.
It wasn't just Shawnee, but it was a lot of those Shawnee counties.
Okay.
And then it seemed like each year they added a few more counties, and you know, now we're hunting them everywhere except for Chicago, basically.
Sure.
So,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Our next question is going to be from Tiffany, and she's curious to why is the legal shooting hours for spring turkey season end at 1 p.m.?
Yeah, so the line of thinking I think we originally set it at noon, and then I'm not sure what year it was. I want to say maybe in the 90s or early 2000s that we pushed it back to 1 o'clock. And the line of thinking was that it would allow hens time to breed in that afternoon where they weren't experiencing any pressure from hunters. And, you know, you're allowing hens to get access to the dominant toms who had successfully made it through the day. And then you're also giving them opportunity to get out and either establish a nest or lay an egg or even start incubation. Now, how much that really plays into, you know, the contemporary thinking is this is less of an issue than we once thought it was. And as a result, most states now allow for hunting all day. Pennsylvania is one that in the early part of the season, you know, where peak breeding and peak nest initiation is occurring, they still shut down hunting at noon. And then Missouri is another one. They're just like us. They, throughout the whole season, the season closes at 1 o'clock. Now, we've done a few hunter satisfaction surveys over the years, and we just concluded one just this year. And the results show that, you know, people are very interested in hunting all day, and they would be, you know, the terms, it'd be high satisfaction with an all-day hunting season for turkeys. And I think biologically we could probably get away with that, with doing an all-day season. The thing that you need to consider in Illinois, though, is we now have a culture that turkey seasons, the turkey hunting day stops at 1 o'clock, and particularly, you know, in Illinois, it's mushroom hunting starts after that. And so, you know, we wouldn't try to tell people what to do on private land, how to handle their day, but on public land, that's something that really needs to be considered. Is there are you know, arguably a lot more mushroom hunters than there are turkey hunters, and so how to handle the turkey hunting day on public land will be something that we're just going to have to take a close look at. But yeah, considering on whether to open the entire day from it'd be essentially 30 minutes before sunrise to sunset, or even 30 minutes past sunset. That's something we're taking a very close look at, and I expect us to possibly make a decision, you know, within the year and within the next couple hunting seasons. There is a possibility that we could be hunting into the evening, but like I said, there's a lot of factors to consider, and it's not just a cut and dry issue. As far as will it hurt the bird, you know, there are some studies out there to show that it may increase harvest. I think Indiana did a good study where they started off like us, closing down at 1 o'clock, and then they evaluated their hunting season immediately after they switched to an all-day season, and they saw harvest raise 10%.
Wow.
And I think, you know, for the most part, I think we could probably absorb that. Our populations could absorb that increase, but it's 10% isn't nothing. You know, that's a lot more birds adding to it. So that's another thing that will weigh into our decision of whether or not to continue closing at 1 o'clock or to go into the evening. And I hear from a lot of guys that, you know, they're old school and they're like, well, I don't want to hunt all day.
Right.
You know, that's too long. But you don't have to. You can go home. You can take a nap in the middle of the day and go back out in the evening, or just quit in the morning, whatever you want to do. But in terms of hunter access and everything, I think it would be a positive for the turkey hunting season as far as hunters are concerned.
Sure. And I'm glad you brought up the other user groups on public land, because that's something that I found a lot of hunters don't necessarily think about when they first start, you know, thinking about regulation changes, is the totality of the different user groups that are also using that same space, and how do you kind of balance between, you know, the pros and cons on each side. So
exactly,
it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Our public lands are open to a whole wide range of activities, and hunting isn't the only one. So we need to consider all users.
Sure. So. Excellent. Our next question comes from James. James asked, what percentage of hens have beards, and what causes this?
So I don't know that anybody has dove into the research to just look at bearded hens, but there have been numerous studies that make the observation, and you come up with anywhere from 5 to 10%. I think I heard recently that there was a study done where they found it was like 15% in the population in the Southwest. Yeah, so it's a lot higher than a lot of people realize, but I think 10% is a pretty good indicate, or a pretty good average to run with.
Sure.
But we make the harvest of bearded hens legal in Illinois, and mostly because we would be concerned that people wouldn't be able to identify, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a jake and a hen, or a long bearded hen and a gobbler. And we don't want to put people in a position where they're unknowingly breaking the law. So that's a big reason why bearded hens are legal to harvest in the spring. And we only see less than 2% of the harvest being made up of bearded hens each year. And a lot of times it's right around 1% of the harvest. So they don't make up a big chunk of the harvest, but you know, they're about 10% of the hens seem to have beards out there. As far as what causes it, I don't know if anybody's dove into that. It's the cluster of cells that produce a beard are present on all birds, male or female. So hens have those cells and the papillae present there on their chest to grow a beard, and it's just whether or not they are activated and grow those long filaments or not. And what causes it, we're not really sure. Is it a genetic mutation in those cells? Is it a hormonal spike? I'm not really sure. The little bit of research that's out there looking at how they behave relative to their unbearded counterparts, they don't see much difference. It's not like a bearded hen is necessarily the top of the pecking order or anything like that. So they get bred, they raise broods, and act just like any other turkey. They just have a little more decor than some of their other hens. So
perfect. Interesting.
Yeah. I'm surprised it's that high.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question is going to be from Michael. Why are some counties not open to fall firearm turkey hunting?
Well, the short answer is that we've always reserved the fall firearm season to the counties with the highest populations of wild turkeys. The fall gun season is open to males and females. And so the concern, especially early on, is that too many hens would be harvested in that fall season and not be around to breed in the spring. Now, traditionally, I mean, there's a lot of states out there where fall turkey hunting was always the big tradition, and it started out bigger than the spring season.
Interesting.
Spring turkey hunting is a relatively new phenomenon in the world of turkey hunting. A lot of, particularly those southeast, Pennsylvania is another one. They still have a really robust fall firearm season. Illinois it used to be bigger than it is now as far as interest, but it was never a real big thing because we were kind of one of the latecomers to having big turkey populations and kicked it off with the spring season. But yeah, we have seen the interest in that fall gun season really drop off as archery season for deer has really gone up. That's the number one name of the game, and then everybody's more interested in turkey hunting in the spring than they are in the fall gun season. And so that interest waning so low, it kind of throws the big concern about the population impact out to a degree. Now, we don't want to just throw all caution to the wind and say it's wide open, just because you never know when interest might spike again. But that's another thing we're taking a close look at to see if there's more counties that we can definitely add to the list to improve hunter access and everything. And you know, if the option's there, why not make it available? So yeah, look in the next few years, and hopefully we'll be adding to that list of counties. Right now, it's reserved to just the western and southern counties, you know, those river corridors and southern Illinois counties that are a little heavily forested that are open right now. But yeah, it's something we're definitely considering opening several more counties, if not a lot more. So.
Excellent. And it'll be quite interesting to see if interest kind of, like you said, spikes up, especially from those like myself who didn't get to scratch that spring turkey hunting itch this year. Yeah. So I'm just kind of curious if you think that, you know, fall interest will actually increase a little bit, or
I would expect, especially, you know, we make it brand new in that county. I think there's no doubt we would see a spike. But you get, I don't know if you guys have ever participated in a fall turkey hunt with firearm. Yeah. It's a humbling experience.
It very much is.
Hunting ghosts out there. They're not nearly as vocal.
Right.
And you either see all the turkeys or you see none of them because they're starting to group up a little more. It's difficult. So, but it's fun. You know, it's a whole different experience than spring hunting for sure.
Excellent. We'll move on to the next question. This comes from Lucius. She asks, I have 2 kids who want to turkey hunt. Can I take them hunting at the same time if I'm with them?
So according to our administrative rules, you can, if a youth hunter is hunting on a youth permit or during a youth season, they need each hunting youth needs their own supervisor. So unfortunately, you'd be able to take both kids, but only one of them would be able to hunt at a time according to our rules. And it's, you know, the big thing is just the safety concern and worrying about a supervisor's ability to effectively monitor both youth hunters at the same time. So that's the big thing. And I understand. I have 2 young boys, and they're not hunting yet, but I definitely look forward to the day they are. And I wish I could take them both hunting at the same time, but you know, it's tough to wrangle 2 kids. It's tough to wrangle 1 kid a lot of times, let alone 2 when you throw firearms into the mix, and that's kind of why those rules were established. So hopefully you can bring along another adult supervisor and get both kids out at the same time.
Okay, great question. So Cierra has our next question, and it is, what kind of career opportunities exist for people who enjoy hunting and want to help with natural conservation efforts or fair chase issues? Yeah,
that's a good question. So obviously, wild turkey biologist is one career opportunity, but you know, there's a lot of opportunities out there. You know, from wildlife biologist to forester to, you know, general conservationist. You know, just getting your roots in biology, that's going to, you know, get you the groundwork on a career in this field. But as far as, you know, next steps to take and working towards your involvement, volunteer whenever and wherever you can. You know, that's something that really helped me out. Good place to start is your NGOs. Your National Wild Turkey Federation is obviously one that I'm very involved with, but Quail Forever, Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers here in Illinois has got an up and coming chapter. So get involved with those NGOs. They're always looking for volunteers, and at the core of all of their fundraising efforts is either habitat improvement or hunter recruitment, and so you're going to get involved with that field some way, shape, or form by getting involved with those groups. I would also say, don't be shy about giving your local wildlife biologist or forester or fisheries biologist a call and seeing how you can volunteer, or if they know of any opportunities to volunteer in their area. The Natural Resources Conservation Service is another great one. They coordinate heavily with the soil and water conservation districts, and so they're always finding volunteer opportunities. And I can't preach it enough. Volunteering is the way to get your foot in the door and to start shaking hands and meeting people in the field, and finding out the direction that you want to go, because it's such a wide range of opportunities, in the world of conservation and biology. So
Excellent, great suggestions. We'll move on to our next question from Ricky. Ricky asks, what is the average nest success rate for turkey in Illinois?
It's shockingly low. When you look at the numbers, it's amazing that these birds even make it from year to year. So the short answer is about 20% or so is what we see hatch an egg. As far as nest success, nest success is considered one egg successfully hatching, and we see that only about 20%. So a hen will lay anywhere from 10 to 12 eggs, and only about 20% of those nests actually hatch one egg, and that's what we see. So if you look at the numbers even more, so we'll start with the hens, only about 80% of them even attempt to nest each year, and then of those nests, only about 20% have an egg that makes it, and then we see about 35% or so of poults make it to a month of age, which is kind of like the critical time frame where they're able to more or less fend on their own. I was listening to a couple of researchers on a webcast just the other day, and they were saying 7% is the number that we see nationwide, and particularly in the Southeast where they do their research. 7% of eggs become an adult turkey. So
Wow.
Pretty dang low. Yeah, you get 100 eggs on the ground, and only 7 of them are going to become adults. And so it's shocking to imagine that these birds even persist. But hens will, if one nest is lost, particularly early in the process, she'll go and attempt another nest, and we've even seen hens attempt as many as 3 nests. But the success rates on those successive nests, they drop. So that first clutch that she gets on the ground is really the money, and so that's where we want to focus our efforts as far as providing nesting and brood rearing habitat and everything is right there in the late April. That's why it's important, if you ever are aware of a nesting hen, give her space. I know it's really neat to flush a big nesting hen off her nest and watch her flush, or a lot of people like to set up trail cameras next to nests, and it's something we definitely advise against. Leave those nests alone, leave those hens alone, and let them do their business, and it'll hopefully it'll end up with more turkeys on the landscape.
Great. Okay, our next question is from Mike, and he was wondering if there's any public land that allows patterning of shotguns.
So there is a list on our website of all of our state-owned sites that have self-trap ranges, meaning like you throw your own clay pigeons for target, and then they have archery ranges as well. And I'm pretty sure that there are just a few that actually have rifle ranges. I would say that list would be the place to start, and I can get a link up for you guys to access that list of all those sites. And I believe they list the phone numbers for each site. And so I would start there. Each site is probably going to have a different opinion on whether or not they would allow patterning of shotguns. It just depends on how their range is set up and everything. But that would be the place to start. And I think this is a question we've been getting more and more of. And I think Jared Duquette, the fellow that you guys did a Q&A on the previous episode, I think he is really looking into this and kind of putting together a questionnaire for sites and trying to see if this is an activity that that the site supervisors would be open to on their specific sites. So yeah, I'll get a link up and stay tuned for updates to that list.
Excellent.
Great.
We look forward to that. And I will put the link again in the video description, so check below for that link. Moving on to our next question from Ralph. This kind of ties back into a question about nest success. But Ralph asks, what impact do nest predators have on nesting success?
Yeah, nest predators, short answer, they have a huge impact. Predators as a whole, a lot of people think they look to bobcats and coyotes as having major population impacts on wild turkeys. And, both species, coyotes and bobcats, so both will get an adult turkey when the opportunity lends itself, but that doesn't happen very, very often. We really see that once a turkey's made it to the adult stage, their annual survival is pretty dang high, but it drops considerably in the springtime. So obviously the big source of mortality for mature males is the hunting season. That's really one of the only ways they're really dying is at a hunter's hand. But as far as females go, they're getting picked off by predators while they're on their nests. And so a hen will basically take two approaches to survival. Is she more concerned with her nest survival, or is she more concerned with her personal survival? Will she hunker down and try to stay on that nest, or is she going to get right out of Dodge and try at another nest? And it's kind of hit or miss on which strategy a lot of hens take. But as far as predators on nest success, that's where predators do have an effect. And we see, your typical nest predators are skunks, possums, raccoons, and snakes actually play a big role too, particularly in the southeast, where they're going to pick off eggs at any opportunity. And so, yeah, they do have an impact, but as long as there's been turkeys, there have been predators and there have been nest predators. And so that's why they take this shotgun approach to reproduction. They try to get as many eggs on the ground as they can as far as the population goes, and hopefully some of them make it to adulthood. And it's why habitat is such a key factor in conserving this bird, in particularly nesting and brood rearing habitat. And so brood rearing being a huge one. Basically we need lush vegetation that small chicks can walk around in, or small poults can walk around in, and that a lot of insects can be found in. That is the large portion, if not the entirety of a young turkey's diet is in insects. So basically, if you're making a habitat for bugs, you're making a good habitat for young turkeys. And that's really the key factor. So if we can get a lot of habitat on the ground, turkeys won't have any problem surviving any predation rates. So sure. They definitely play their role. I talked about only 7 eggs in 100 make it to adulthood, and a large number of those are being eaten by nest predators. There's no question.
Interesting. Just a quick follow-up. Have you seen a correlation? I know you guys have a fairly large-scale wild turkey research project going on right now that kind of looks at nest success as one of the variables. Have you guys seen a significant kind of increase or decrease in nest success depending on the vegetation type that nest is actually in?
Well, that is something they're looking at for sure, but all those results are very preliminary.
Sure.
So I haven't seen, that is one thing that there's a large-scale turkey project being conducted at the University of Illinois. Jeff Hoover is the principal investigator, and then Christine Parker and Morgan Meter are the graduate students that are working on that project. And yeah, they've got a really neat project looking at woodland management and how it impacts turkey nest success and habitat use and annual survival are the big things. They're also taking a look at where they can the impacts of black flies or buffalo gnats in areas where those insects are very prevalent, particularly in western Illinois. And so yeah, one of the things they're looking at are vegetation attributes and habitat types of successful nests, but all those results are very preliminary right now. I think they're working on summarizing a lot of data on prescribed fire, and I have seen some of that data. So overall, prescribed fire is a very good thing for wild turkeys, and it's a very good thing for open oak woodland habitat, but it's more complicated than just fire means more turkeys. It's
right.
Very interesting to see how they don't necessarily get right in there and use these areas that are recently burned. They're using the perimeters, and they like those sites the best 2 or 3 years after a burn. And so it's I think the term being used is pyrodiversity. So pyrodiversity matters. Having a diversity in your fire regimes, your scale of your fire, and your return interval on fire and intensity, and then of course the time of year of when you burn too. So
interesting.
Go ahead. I was just saying it's a really interesting project, and we're excited to see how it all ends up.
Sure. One more quick follow-up on that. You mentioned the timing of the fire and how that plays importance in obtaining the diversity you're looking for. And the normal notion that a lot of prescribed fire and biologists use is the concept of fall fires favor forbs.
Sure.
So I know it's all still preliminary, but have they seen a difference between a spring fire versus a fall fire in that turkey response?
Yeah, so the data I've seen so far has been mostly on one site, and that site during the years that they've got summarized right now, they're all dormant season burns.
Okay.
So I haven't seen that in particular, but as far as habitat response, you do get very favorable responses by throwing in those growing season burns, for sure. And a lot of people are concerned about burning up nests, and that doing it during early summer as far as turkeys go. And that's not something that is typically found. I know that keeps a lot of managers away from conducting a later spring and early summer burn. I'm not saying that that's the only concern. So if you have other concerns as far as reptiles, amphibians, or other sensitive species, take those into account. But if wild turkey nests are your only concern with regards to doing a growing season burn, you shouldn't be as concerned. Number one, they're not typically nesting in areas that need to be burned so bad. They're not in those super rank stands. They do require a lot of cover, but if a place hasn't been burned for a number of years, 4 or 5 years, and it's on that burn rotation, they're probably not nesting in it, or that's what a lot of the data shows. And then the nests are so sparse on the landscape, and typically woodland burns are of such low intensity that nest failure due to it being burned isn't seen very often. So in the end, you know, get some fire on the ground for these turkeys. They respond well to it. But there is you know, you should keep scale in mind. Don't try not to burn entire stands. You know, in Illinois, where our tracts of land are much smaller, this is less of a concern. You know, a turkey's home range can cover 1,000 acres or more, and so it's pretty rare that we're burning that big of an area all at once, particularly on private land.
Sure.
But it should be something that you keep in mind. You know, if you're burning one area, make sure they've got cover relatively close to it that is not being burned.
Perfect. Well, we're running out of time, and that kind of wraps up the questions we have. So again, we want to give a huge thank you to Luke Garver for coming out today.
Yeah.
Do you have any other projects or anything you kind of want to bring up and kind of mention real quick?
Yeah, I guess it'd be a good time to mention, I mentioned briefly, we did a hunter satisfaction survey, and we initiated it late last year and finished it up earlier this year. And that is available. I guess that's one more link we can throw up there for folks to look at. You know, our current season structure has been in place for nearly 20 years, and we hear from more and more people all the time that they'd like to see changes to how we manage the turkey hunting season. And we didn't want to do that without public input. So public input is one major factor, and then the ecology of this bird is another major factor. And so we're going to take both of those components and try to you know, look at the data to see if there are any changes, you know, that are warranted to be made. And that was kind of the target of the survey, to get everyone's opinion on how satisfied they are with the current hunting regulation, how they would respond to potential other changes, you know, and we took examples from other states and threw them in there to see how people would respond as well. So as far as we're concerned, there's really the sky's the limit as far as how we do this, the hunting season, and we want to make sure that, like I said, we conserve the natural resource of the wild turkey, and we, you know, keep as many hunters as happy as possible. Now, one thing, if you look at turkey hunting across the nation, no two states do it exactly the same, and there are pretty good turkey populations across most of the states, especially the Midwest. So, yeah, that's something to definitely keep an eye on. To follow up with the survey, we definitely want to reach back out with the public on some more specific scenarios, and we would be potentially interested in doing a public meeting type of thing like they've done with waterfowl. It's been hard to do lately, you know.
Right.
We can't exactly do any public meetings, so we will we'll continue to weather the storm of this of the COVID-19 pandemic and see how it affects our ability to have public meetings. But if we need to go to other measures, that's and do an online type of thing, that's something we will be exploring as well. So
sure. Well, thanks again for joining us, and thank you all at home for watching and listening. We hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks again.
yeah, thanks guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Luke.